Hello everyone and welcome back to day 25 of the 30-day film challenge. And today's topic is going to be a film not set in your current era, and for this topic I decided to pick Lord of the Rings and the Two Towers, which is the sequel to Fellowship of the Ring, which I just reviewed yesterday. And like I said in that video, this is the first time I've ever seen these movies. So if I don't get all the names of the places or the people correct, don't blame me. This is really my first reactions to these movies rather than an analysis like some of these other movies I've reviewed in this 30-day film challenge in the past. This is more of a first reaction because this is the first time I've ever seen this movie. Actually, technically the second time, because I watched these movies for the first time ever last month. So I've seen all three movies already, and I just watched The Two Towers for a second time today, and my opinion stays on this one as it was before, which is a massive improvement over the first one. This is actually my favorite of the trilogy. I need to watch Return of the King one more time to actually give my full rankings, but this movie in every single way is an improvement over the first. And my biggest issue with The Fellowship of the Ring was the pacing of that film. It's a very long movie. It's 3 hours long, and this movie is just as long, but the pacing feels so much better, mainly because this movie, not mainly because it has more action, but because this movie has a sense of purpose and has a more standard 3-act structure, whereas the last one felt like it had a random 4th act in there. And yes, there is tons more action in this film, which I love all of that. The opening scene is extremely exciting, watching Gandalf fall, because obviously we know Gandalf does not die in these movies, which I thought he did at the end of the third one with the You Shall Not Pass, but apparently that was in Fellowship. So this movie was completely fresh and new to me. I had no idea what I was getting into once again, and let's just jump to the ending. The Battle of Helm's Deep is incredible. The filmmaking on display in this film is incredible. Peter Jackson directs the hell out of this movie. That entire Helm's Deep sequence, not only does the geography of this place work so well, you know where the walls, you know where the gate is, you know the one weakness of this place, and you know that everybody's going to end up running to the keep, and they're going to have to try to hold on as long as they possibly can before Gandalf comes to save the day. But it's just so incredibly tense, and what makes it so well is the fact that this movie is so well paced, and you get to know the characters much more in this film than you did in the last one. And I think in particular you get to meet King Theoden, the king of Rohan, I think. And so this character was probably the most interesting for me out of all these movies, besides maybe Gollum, which I'll get into Gollum in a second here. But you really get to know this guy and how he just lost his son, but for the longest time he was under the spell of Saruman, and so he had no control over himself until Gandalf freed him. And so he's very interesting character because he just wants to protect his people. He doesn't want to fight in this war. He wants to run and hide in Helm's Deep and just stay there to try to keep his people safe, even though he knows there's grave danger coming towards him. And by the end of the film, he's a great king, and he teams up with Aragorn, and he rides out on the horses down the path, destroying all these orcs, and he's just such a great character arc. This film has some great character arcs for a lot of the characters, including the entire character arcs with Gollum and Frodo. And I am just going to rave about Gollum like everybody has ever done. I do believe my favorite scene of Gollum is actually in The Hobbit. The Unexpected Journey, the entire riddle sequence in The Hobbit is incredible. That's probably my favorite scene in every single Lord of the Rings movie that I've seen. Out of all 6 of them, that's my favorite scene. But his character in this film is so fascinating because obviously he has dual perspectives of Gollum and Smeagol, and so you have that dynamic between the two that is just incredible. And I think that the performance by Andy Serkis was just top notch. He is incredible as this character, and you know, he's known for a lot of motion capture roles, including the Planet of the Apes movies, which I still think is my favorite performance of his. But there's something special about this character and how it's the back and forth between him and Smeagol, or Gollum and Smeagol, that makes the character so interesting because, you know, he has this tragic story, as we learn in Return of the King, but in this film, without knowing that, it's just the balance between Gollum's fierce and anger and greed and how much he wants the ring versus Smeagol trying to serve his master, being Frodo, and Smeagol being more kind, and the aspect of his character that isn't fully taken over by the ring, where, as you see by the end of this film, he kind of loses that side of him, which is very tragic. The story of Gollum is extremely tragic, which we'll get into when we talk about Return of the King, but he's a fascinating character. And like I said, his dynamic with Frodo and Sam is especially interesting because Sam doesn't trust him whatsoever, and I think Sam is a little more unlikable in this movie than he was in the first, but Sam is still my favorite character, especially his speech at the end of the movie. Just incredible. Perfect writing. But for the most part, Sam just doesn't trust Gollum. I love Gollum so much. It's like, just give him a break, give him, he needs to be treated well in order for him to be good. And so the three character dynamic between Gollum, Frodo, and Sam is just extremely interesting and entertaining throughout the entire movie. And you also get a side adventure with Pippin and Merry, which is maybe my least favorite part of the movie the first time I watched it, but the payoff with the Ents is so great because they take on Saruman and that entire place where he's forming the orcs, and they completely destroy it, which is incredibly entertaining because I don't know, they're just like, that's a side mission that kind of has more comedic relief because Pippin is just extremely funny, but Merry gets a lot more to do in this movie and how much he wants to fight because they feel like they're just small hobbits and they have no place in this battle, in this war, but they do. They have a huge integral part because they're the ones who take out one of the two towers. And so their entire journey throughout this movie, although you're cutting away from the action of Helm's Deep, is still very entertaining in and of itself. And even Gimli and Legolas get a lot more to do in this movie, mainly because they're fighting in the Battle of Helm's Deep, and they kind of have the banter back and forth between, them saying that they're getting more kills than each other, and they're kind of arguing about that in the middle of the battle, which is very entertaining. But they're badass in this movie. It's what the promise of hearing who Legolas was beforehand, when everybody was hyping up this character for me. This is what I was expecting to see, and he is a lot better in this movie. Although they don't necessarily get arcs still in this movie, I don't think either of those characters are necessarily the most interesting. I think in general, the Lord of the Rings movies kind of struggle with giving all the characters proper arcs. I think King Theoden has a great arc. I think Aragorn has a less interesting arc, but he does have an arc, and Frodo and Sam obviously have an arc, and Gollum has a great arc, but nobody else really does, and there's a lot of characters in these movies, and EOWYN in this movie just, I don't know, I don't really like her character too much because they don't give her anything to do. They always push her off on the side and tell her, oh, you can't join the battle, even though you see her training with the sword, and you think she could be a complete badass. You never get to see that in this film, which is very frustrating because, I don't know, they just don't treat that character too well besides having a crush on Aragorn, which there's that whole kind of sort of love triangle thing between her, Aragorn, and then that one elf lady who just kind of pops up twice in this movie and then in the other movie and then in the last movie, and then they get together, and it's a very poor arc. Like I said, Aragorn's character, in terms of that side of him, is not that interesting. Him becoming a king is very interesting, but that side of it is just very uninteresting, and I don't care about any of that. I just want to see this character be cool because EOWYN seems like she could be a very integral part of this battle, but she's just pushed off on the side, and it's very frustrating. I think that by far is my least favorite aspect of this movie, but besides that, this movie is excellent. The pacing is extremely fast-paced for a 3-hour-long movie. It just flies by. The Battle of Helm's Deep is near perfect, and then the end payoff is incredible as well. And then, of course, you have Gollum finally being introduced, and his character is just everything I wanted to be and more. And so that is my thoughts on Lord of the Rings, The Two Towers. This movie is a massive improvement over the first film. I think every single character gets a moment to shine, at least in this film, whereas the last one, not so much. So I don't know. This movie's probably my favorites of the three. I need to rewatch The Return of the King before tomorrow's video so I can really get a grasp of which one's actually my favorites. But that will be it for today's video. If you guys enjoyed this video, subscribe to the channel, leave a comment down below what you thought of The Two Towers, or what's your pick for a movie that's not set in the current era. I had a hard time thinking of any other movie that would fit for this, or maybe it's just a movie that isn't set in 2020 or like 2019 or just any year recently, I guess. I don't know. This was the only thing I can think of. So thanks for watching this video. Subscribe, like I said, and I hope to see you all in my next one.